The greatest commandment in the Bible is to love God with all your heart. The second greatest commandment is to love one another. After that, it's a bit of a free-for-all, but I'd probably give third place to the fifth of the 10 commandments, do not murder. 6 months ago, our pastor, Zach, broke the fifth commandment. We loved God with the fullness of our hearts. We cared for the sick, the poor, the needy. We ran soup kitchens out of the back of our church, put on daycares for single moms, read to the elderly, but because Zach broke the fifth commandment, it was as if our church had been cursed. Sometimes, when I was in church on my own, it felt as if God had abandoned the building. And something dark and hungry had taken his place. 6 months ago, after a Sunday evening service, Zach was locking up the church. He was on his own, had stayed late to finish preparing a midweek Bible study. Fiddling with the key in the lock, he'd felt someone tap him on the shoulder. He'd turned around, expecting to see someone from our congregation, perhaps Martha, who had a terrible habit of leaving her Bible under her seat. Instead, he saw a man he'd never met before. So close Zach could feel his stinking breath on his forehead, tall but wiry, in clothes that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in years. Looked like he was in his 60s. Teeth all janky, foaming at the mouth. Wild eyes, like the eyes of a rabid animal, but focused, unblinking. Fixed on him, and before Zach even knew what was happening, the man had handed him a knife. Zach says that the blade was already covered in blood, although no one ever figured out where the blood came from. Zach later told us that he took a step back towards the church, pressed himself against the door, the knife in his hands. He said that there was no way he could have stopped what happened. Couldn't have stopped the man from stepping forwards, and stepping forwards again, and again, and again. Until Zach's hand was pressed against the man's stomach, and the man's lips were stained red. Zach was a good person, he did all he could for the man. But the man bled out on the church's welcome mat. Zach said that after he called for an ambulance, he prayed for him. While he prayed, the man never broke eye contact. Zach told us that he believed the man actually smiled, grinned, before he died. We found out the next morning. The next few months were some of the worst our church ever faced. Zach was arrested, questioned by the police. I even had to lead the midweek Bible study and preach my first sermon. The church's CCTV saved Zach. Proved that there really wasn't much that Zach could have done. I told him exactly that when I sat with him one night, smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey on his porch. I can remember how badly his hands were shaking, how pale his face was. You're a good man, Zach, I told him. We talked about the act of killing in the Bible, the righteous war of the Israelites as they invaded Canaan, the slaughtering of the residents of Jericho. Holy destruction. But something about Zach's actions didn't feel righteous. Deep down, I knew he'd done something terrible that night. He'd broken the fifth commandment. You're a good man, I told him, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just smoked and drank, until the sun began to rise. The size of our congregation shrank drastically. We'd originally had around 130 weekly attendees, but within the course of a month, it had gone down to about 60. Mostly older people, although a few families stayed. It took about that long for the Holy Spirit to leave that place, for the darkness to set in. It was a Tuesday night, during our kids group. Only 3 kids were there that week, and it was just me and my wife running the night. We told them the story of Daniel in the den of lions, made them popcorn and put on a film. Turned the lights off, but one of the kids wasn't interested. Ola, 6 years old. Tiny little thing, always quiet. During the film, she got out of her chair, wandered off. I followed her, retreating from the brightness of the projector screen. As she walked towards the back left corner of the room, she stopped about 5 feet away from it. Pitch black. Could barely see anything at all. But Ola lifted up her hand, as if she was reaching out for something. You're missing the movie, I said, but Ola didn't respond. kept her hand held up, her palm now pointing at the ceiling. "Ola," I said, and she turned her head to look at me. "I'm talking," she told me, and then she turned to face the darkness again. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, but I swear that this corner was darker than anywhere else in the room. Blackout blinds, dark. And cold. Like really, ridiculously cold. "Who are you talking to?" I asked her. She didn't answer, wasn't even paying attention to me, but she stumbled back a few steps. "I don't want to do that," she said. And then she dropped her hand to her side. Suddenly I didn't feel so cold, and the corner didn't look quite as dark. Ola span on her heels, ran back to her chair at the front of the church, scooped up a handful of popcorn from her bowl. As if nothing had happened, I talked to my wife about it on the way back from church. She thought it was nothing. Spoke to Zach about it the next day. He took me a bit too seriously. Even put out his cigarette. "Pray," he told me. "When the whole world seems dark, that's when you should pray." Stamped out his cigarette with the heel of his boot. Weeks passed, nothing too strange to report, except for a feeling. A feeling that things weren't quite right. A feeling that I shouldn't be in the church on my own after dark, a feeling like something lurked behind every door. And a few odd stories. Things like, the projector turned itself off in the middle of a service, so we had to resort to getting out a stack of old hymn books. We turned up for our midweek Bible study to find a dead mouse next to the pulpit. Put out mousetraps all over the place but never found any more. Ola told her parents that she'd seen a black goat roaming around the fields behind the church, with chains wrapped around its horns. Martha left her Bible underneath her chair one night. But when she came to pick it up on the Monday morning, she found that it had been left in front of the entrance. These were the kind of stories you might tell around a campfire to freak out a few kids, but we didn't take it too seriously. We had too much on our plates already. Zach's drinking habit was getting out of hand, and his sermons were becoming increasingly incomprehensible. Our church was dwindling in size. Teenagers were filming TikToks in front of the building, calling it the murder church. It's not as if we were moving on from what had happened, it was impossible to move on. But we really did believe that God would one day come back to this building, would make it his home again. I first realized that he was well and truly gone 2 months ago. Tuesday night, kids group. Me, my wife, Ola and 2 other girls, no one else in the church. Zach was letting us use his office, which was upstairs in the church, next to the sports hall. We were leading a Bible study on David and Goliath, and my wife and I were far more interested than the girls were. About 30 minutes into the study, Ola told my wife that she needed to go to the toilet. My wife offered to escort her. Ola turned her down, and then my wife insisted. So off they went together, leaving me and the 2 girls alone. Zach's office is a small room, lined with tall bookcases, thousands of old Bible commentaries. A big desk next to the window, embroidered with coffee rings. A giant lamp as the main source of light. Some beanbags, for any casual meetings, those are what we were sat on that night, and a thick, heavy door, the kind of door you'd have to shove to open. Beyond the door, the staircase. The girls and I were waiting for my wife and Ola to return when we heard the footsteps. Right at the bottom of the stairs, a dense thud, as if someone had put all of their weight into their foot. There was a long moment of silence, just long enough that I thought I'd imagined it. Then, thud. 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 Faster now, but just as firm, just as heavy, working their way up the stairs. There are 14 stairs that lead to Zach's office and the sports hall. Whoever was coming up these stairs in that moment was making short work of them. The girls pulled each other close. I could see how terrified they were. To be honest, even though I thought it was probably just my wife playing a prank on me, I was pretty freaked out, too. And those footsteps were getting closer, thud. Thud, thud. Only, as they were getting closer, it was as if they were becoming quieter, lighter, softer, as if whatever was making its way up the stairs had paws or hooves. And there was a new sound, something I could just about make out. The rattling of chains. The footsteps continued once whoever, or whatever, this was had reached the stop of the stairs. They stopped right outside the door. Then there was silence. "Who's there?" I called out. "Ruth, is that you?" No answer. "Ruth?" The door handle turned, kept turning, twisted unnaturally far, and then the door slowly swung open. This was a heavy door, remember, but the door opened smoothly, without resistance. On the other side, all I could see was darkness. Then I heard the scream. A heart-wrenching, terrified scream. Somewhere deep within the church. My wife. Ruth, instinct kicked in. Suddenly I didn't give a crap about whatever was lurking in the darkness. I knew that my wife was in danger, and I needed to get to her. So I told the girls to stay in Zach's office, took a deep breath and then flung myself out of the room. No one was in the hallway, although I felt as if I was being watched from all sides. But I didn't have time to dwell on that. I threw myself down the stairs, ran towards the restrooms. Found my wife stood outside the ladies, bawling her eyes out, her skin prickled with goosebumps. I couldn't get a word out of her, except for that she didn't know where Ola was. I knew exactly where she'd be. I found her stood near the back corner of the church main hall, the corner a black abyss leaking out into the room. Ola was silent, her hand stretched out into the shadows. "I don't want to," she said again. And then, out of the shadows, a hand reached out and touched hers. A big hand, a man's hand. I just about stopped myself from screaming, and I was glad that I did, because a moment later, the man in the corner stepped out of the darkness and revealed himself. Zach. Clearly drunk, with an unlit cigarette hanging out of his mouth. "You should get back to your Bible study," he told Ola, slurring his words. Ola didn't go back to her study. I called her parents, called the other girls' parents, too. I also called the rest of the church's elders, and I recommended that Zach should be encouraged to take a sabbatical. I even drove him to the airport that weekend. We didn't say a word to one another, but Zach didn't look well. He hadn't shaved in a while, and he definitely hadn't washed. After he took his suitcase out of the bunk of my car, I prayed for him and sent him on his way. It took until that night for my wife to tell me what had happened to her in the restroom. She didn't tell me much, she was far too embarrassed to elaborate. But what she did say is that when she left her toilet stall, she saw something stood in the doorway, a black goat, about as big as a wolf, with chains wrapped around its horns. Staring right at her, we stopped going to church after that. I hadn't given up on God. Certainly hadn't turned away from my faith, but I definitely distanced myself from my church. I wanted nothing to do with it, didn't want to talk about it. I even ignored Zach's texts, the few attempts at calls that he made. I'm ashamed to say that I blocked his number. When I heard from an elder last week that Zach hadn't returned from his sabbatical, I didn't think much of it. I had too much going on in my own life. Ruth and I both weren't sleeping well, and we were arguing more. She clearly couldn't stop thinking about that night, but she wouldn't talk to me about it. To be honest, we'd been working hard to put this chapter of our lives behind us. But that changed 2 nights ago. I received a phone call from Ola's mom. Almost didn't pick up, and I kind of wished that I hadn't. She had a story to tell me, through tears and panic and stress. Because 2 nights ago, Ola had been at the kids' group. And one of the elders had found her stood in that dark corner of the church, facing the shadows, with her hand stretched out. "I don't want to," she'd said. Then a man's hand had reached out to touch hers. Only this hand had been holding a knife, already slick with blood. A knife that settled in Ola's open palm. Apparently Ola stood dead still as the man walked out of the shadows, a tall and wiry man with dirty clothes and a stinking breath, a man who walked straight into the blade, without hesitation. Apparently Zach died with a big grin on his face, and with eyes as wild as an animal's. I hung up the phone, blocked Ola's number. Didn't tell my wife. Last night, I woke up to find Zach sat at the end of my bed. His face was thick with sweat, his eyes blazing with fury, and there was a lit cigarette hanging out of his mouth. In the doorway, I saw a black goat, almost as large as a man, with chains wrapped around its horns. In Zach's right hand, I saw that he gripped a knife, held out towards me. I don't want it, I thought, and he smiled in response. And then he was gone, as if he'd never been there. My room was empty, and Ruth was still fast asleep, but I've written this story down because I want someone to know that if I ever break the fifth commandment, it won't be out of choice. I've also written this down because I want someone to pray for me. The whole world seems dark, and I need prayer. It didn't work for Zach, but maybe it will work for me.